Well, these are two new commissioned work by Yarad Foundation, Yarad Arts Center, and one is specifically done in Baku, one is addressing something also started in Baku but all around the world, art institutions in relationship with living beings. Talking about the other work, the first one, which is the name of the exhibition as well, No Poems Loves Its Poets. It comes from a graffiti I saw in Sovietsky, the small Soviet neighborhood. It was named after Soviets, and the neighborhood is being disappearing. So when I was here in May, there was still some remains from the neighborhood, and there was one of the houses was still standing, had this graffiti on it. So I found it very poetic, and finding poetry on the streets is something very special. You know, it's you encounter that this is a way of expression, right? It could be something absolutely romantic, maybe on paper, but finding it in everyday life in the street, that's what fascinates me. And also the language. The one I found, it was in Turkic language. So if you speak Turkish, you understand. If you speak Azeri, you can also understand. And then there was another one that was in Russian. So I like this different kind of cosmopolitan nature of Baku. You know, not starting with English as the central language, but the Turkic language and Slavic Russian language being spoken around as main languages makes it a different kind of cosmopolitan town, which is more similar to Istanbul rather than European towns. Also in terms of architecture, that was also something what was my big interest, that everything remained from the Soviet times. They're still very visible around the city, monuments and like this neighborhood that is being destroyed. But beside the neighborhood, there are other things like the oil rigs from the Soviet times. They're monumentally standing by the sea, where we also used as one of the locations, and also the mosque standing next to the Soviet monuments, next to the new version of architecture here that is more postmodern and futuristic kind of architecture that found also its place in Baku, but all side by side. So I was interested with this presence, side by side presence of the past, of the future, of the present, and as well as how it's related to everyday life, and also pointing the part that is partly disappearing and fully maybe be disappeared by the time we have the show is this neighborhood, and in the neighborhood how the past will still remain. So the street sign Tolstoy, which also named after a writer, was very important sign. So I found poetry, I found literature on the streets, and then I saw this white cat also standing there in the middle of ruins in front of one of the houses that's remained at the time. Domestic cat, a cat that is you know, there to be indoors, but it was in the street. It was at least by outside of the house. Beautiful white cat that reminded me of this cat that has blue and green eye. We call one cat, right? So this cat is a regional cat. It's a cat has different names in different languages, and it's a part of heritage in the whole region actually. So that was also an interesting another encounter. So I found poetry, I found literature, and then I encountered this cat in that neighborhood, in the street. So everything somehow was back in the streets, you know, and back to everyday life. No matter what the everyday life is that in that moment. So whatever remains from the past, whatever not, is present, and that was my fascination and what I wanted to address. So there was a former Soviet flight attendant appearing in the film, trying to go to a destination of a country that doesn't exist anymore, let's say, with the street sign of Tolstoy. So this is kind of a departure to nowhere, but also somewhere at the same time. So that's kind of the narrative in the film that you will be able to see in this installation, which includes some of the objects from we found from that era here in Baku. So those objects will slowly become part of the film, part of the screen as a wall. So the screen is not just a surface, but it is a wall. It's a wall of present, wall of past, a wall of future. And beside this work that is specifically done for this exhibition, I also have this other work that is gonna expand itself over the time, which is another story. When I came to Yarat after the site visit, I encountered a little plate in front of the entrance and with food in it. And I asked, they said they have also cats here. Yarat adapted. Yeah. So that was interesting because I was already thinking about the falcons. They live on the tower of Tate Modern Museum. You know, there are two falcons have been living there, and that's their place. So when we think of a museum, it's not just a museum that has an audience only made of humans, you know, and then there are other creatures that they also claim ownership in culture places too, in institutions too, and they find their way as well. Sometimes they squat, sometimes they surround, you know. So I made a collection, this kind of a growing archive of those animals that we don't necessarily think they could have anything to do with art institutions, like the polar bear from north of Norway that is around the art residency program there, or like the dog from that is adopted by the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, or like the falcons in Tate Modern, or the cat in Yarat, or you know the bats from Cambodian National Museum. That these are the examples, example sculptures. So parts of the architecture becomes a pedestal, becomes a base for each animal that is occupying or hosted or being part of the family of that institution. And this will grow because I am sure there are a lot more stories of a lot more unusual animals. They are inhabiting art spaces, culture spaces, and we have a lot more to learn from these unexpected guests of art institution.